Thanks for joining us. Alex, you want to start?
Yep, sounds good. I was waiting for the few more people to join. Hey everyone, thank you all for joining us today. It's very exciting to have you all with us. This is the first public roast. So again, thank you. So I'm going to tell you what this roast is and a few kind of house rules, and then we'll get started. So the roast, as you might have seen, is a semi-weekly call where we invite a speaker to actually roast our project, and we also consider it our main point of synchronous communication with the community. And so this is the main goal of the roast, is to invite criticism, constructive criticism of our project and community interaction with us, while also giving you guys updates on what we've been up to. So this is what's going to happen, and this is the first one. So before we start, a few key things. The first one and the most important one is this is a chill, relaxed environment, and there's no such thing as a stupid question here. We know, the topic involves a lot of different disciplines put together, and it's totally fine, to not be an expert at all of this when you ask a question, and that's why we're here together, and we're here to help each other. That being said, there is such a thing as do your own research, and so we've put out 2 posts, the Medium post and the Ether Search post, that introduce different parts of what we've been up to, and we do recommend reading them before generally, asking a lot of questions that might have been answered there. Myth. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, well, actually, Stefan, could you go to the next slide? Right, so there are other community calls that you can join. So there's a core dev call that happens twice a week on Tuesday and Friday. And there's a research workshop that happens weekly on Thursday. So these are different calls that have an hour of scope. And should you be interested in some of these areas, these are calls you can definitely join. It's important to know that this call is recorded, and the slides that Stefan is presenting are public and will be made available in the GitHub PM repo of Flashbots that is publicly accessible. And we definitely want to continue the conversation asynchronously, and so that can be done on our GitHub, where you can jam with us, and you can join our Discord as well, where we have different channels where you can continue the conversation. Yeah, so last thing, the agenda. Stefan, please, next slide. Right, so this is the agenda for today. So we'll start with quick updates on our organization and our different endeavors so far. So research, MEV Gef, and MEV Inspect, and then we'll get to the main event. So Dan's first roast, and answering those questions, and then we'll finish by a general ask me anything. One thing that's important to note is for each sections here, we'll leave out a little bit of time for questions afterwards, and we ask you to ask your questions in the chat directly rather than speaking to be more efficient. And so the person leading this section will just pick a few questions. In the interest of time, of course, please don't get offended if you're cut off or your question isn't selected. We want to make sure we don't overrun on time. And so we'll move forward, and we might not be able to answer all the questions, nor be as exhaustive as we would like it to be if we had unlimited amount of time. All right, that being said, I will hand it off to Tina to get started by talking about the Flashbots organization and our research efforts. Thank you again, and yeah.
Cool. There seems to be an echo. I hope you guys can hear me fine. Okay, so I'll start with introducing our Flashbots organization that arises out of MEV Partnership Research Collective, which is a continuous Flash organization designed for anti-fragility. Research and development are the 2 tightly coupled dual engines that propel Flashbots in a phased approach. Our research effort is long-term oriented. whereas our engineering is milestone-driven. The research arm focuses on defining our organization's phases and identifying key milestones associated with each of them, and is responsible for speccing out our engineering roadmap. The engineering teams, plural here, are organized as product-focused teams we memed as special purpose vessels, as a play on SPV, that basically ship the core infrastructure and the ecosystem tools. And currently our core infrastructure entails an ETH client implementation, MEV Geth, and our ecosystem tooling involves MEV Inspect, which Steph and Scott will introduce in a bit. And so the engineering teams with its product portfolio, while basically collecting data and producing other artifacts that can feed back into the research. Next page. Thanks. So phase one of the Flashbots research roadmap is considered a proof of concept stage of Flashbots. It is basically a practical ultra-applied research process, similar to the industry R&D in closed loop with development. And we expect the research engineers to be heavily involved in the research process. So phase one has 2 papers as deliverables. The first draft will be due at the end of January and publication targeting Q1 of 2021. The outcome of phase one is immediately relevant to provide the technical and economic evaluation to the Flashbots proof of concept and communicating our design and intentions to the community. So for our full research roadmap that entails beyond phase one, please check out the file in the Flashbots GitHub. And the paper 1 and 2 basically focuses on 7 or maybe more than 7 research questions that we have spelled out here, including how can we build a good auction mechanism for validator priority bribes? Can we leverage existing auctions literature to design a good MEV auction mechanism? And how does the system architecture differ across the different blockchain architecture? And for the second paper, there are currently identified 4 core research questions, including should we build a good auction mechanism? Should we build one? And second one is how do we minimize the possible user harm of priority bribe incentives? And how do we minimize possible consensus harm of such incentives? And lastly, should we allow for any MEV on the system and should we bound them? Of course, are we limited to just these 7 research questions? The answer is no. If there is a critical research question you believe essential to paper 1 and 2 for our MVP stage, please open a GitHub issue in the MEV research repo and convince us why it merits to be a standalone question to be answered and why it is crucial to these 2 papers at this phase of Flashbots. Next slides. So how does this collective research process work? Well, you can consider it as a research hackathon. The key there is anyone can contribute. You can be a natural person with academic pedigree, or a renowned organization, or a professional DeFi thought leader, not pointing out at anyone specific in this call. Or you could be a crypto anime with a hot alias. We only care about the quality of contribution and the alignment with Flashbots sets of values that has been set forth in our Medium and ETH research posts. So there are 2 main roles for contributing to the Flashbots collective research. One is MEV fellows, and the second is research contributors. So basically an MEV research fellow or MEV fellow is a MEV fellowship grant recipient whose FRP has been accepted upon review and who undertakes answering the research questions specified in the Flashbots research roadmap. In addition to delivering the FRPs, the MEV fellows, who can be either, as I said, various entities, they will act as the co-authors of the Flashbots research paper and are responsible for collaborating with other MEV fellows in architecting, coordinating, and delivering the Flashbots research papers and presentations. Next page, please. And FRP basically stands for Flashbots Research Proposal, and it's basically a markdown document described the approach to answering a Flashbots research question specified on the research roadmap. So it's very similar to a proposal that, a research proposal for academic writings, and it entails introducing what the research process to do, proposes to do or prove. And it should incorporate systematic breakdown of the research question, should incorporate in-depth account of the methodologies, approaches, or theories that will be used to support a hypothesis within the project, including a review of the relevant literature. And of course, each FRP is unique and can vary significantly in structure. And in the Flashbots research proposal process, it follows roughly what we modeled upon, which is the EIP process. And you can actually check out two examples. So one for the first research question for paper 1, and second is also linked in the slides. It's basically Suri Bakshi's FRP draft that he has forked the repo and drafted the first version of it. And lastly, key dates. So December 13th, basically 2.5 weeks from now, will be the deadline for the draft FRP submissions. And on December 17th, we expect the fellowship to be granted. And at the end of January, on the 27th, it will be the MEV fellows presenting the completed FRP on MEV.WTF on conference. And lastly, we plan to finalize the papers at the end of February for publications. So that's all.
All right, let's keep it moving, and then maybe we can do Q&A at the end if there's questions. So engineering update. We've been quite heads down so far on the engineering to make sure that we have a proof of concept that is production ready and people can start actually mining against and sending bundles against. But the proof of concept is sort of an incomplete version of where we want the system to be in the future. So this is sort of step one in the process to getting to a full ecosystem of Flashbot development. So step one, proof of concept, MEV Geth. We've completed and built the upgrade to Geth. We're in the process of running latency benchmarks to compare what side by side of running a regular Geth node with an MEV Geth node is. We're hosting currently an MEV Geth node for searchers or potential searchers that are interested in giving us product feedback and helping us iterate on the interface that is currently being exposed through the JSON RPC. And we're looking for feedback from miners and mining pools who are interested in running MEV Geth. I'll say something about where this fits in the greater roadmap of Flashbots. And a good place to look is on the ETH research post where I've taken this screenshot from. Essentially, MEV Geth has partial guarantees on what we would deem to be sort of a robust MEV auction system. The two components that are missing are complete privacy and finality. The complete privacy is a guarantee where even the person who's ordering the transaction doesn't know what is the content of the transactions. So in the case of Flashbots, it's saying the miners don't actually see any of the transactions that they're mining against. So that would require some sort of SGX or some other privacy technology, and is an area that we want to really incentivize research in, so that it can be brought to production readiness. The second one is finality, and this is the prevention of attacks like time-banded attacks, where there is some chain reorging going on in order to extract MEV that would otherwise be expected to be finalized. Here, again, there's a bit of a discussion in the blog post about what expected solutions could be, but we want to incentivize research in this direction. So for MEV Inspect, Scott, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So the MEV Inspect is the system which analyzes previous transactions, categorizes them, and then provides that information on a dashboard to surface what's been going on with relation to MEV. So we'll classify things as whether something was a liquidation, whether something was an arbitrage, and we'll try to figure out how much profit was there, how much wasted transactions there were, and we've made some really good progress in adding additional inspectors, coming up with a great data design. We added a new dashboard based on Metabase that allows for a really nice presentation of these metrics to people who are interested, and also allows ad hoc analysis. And we've come up with some really interesting charts. I included some more in the following slides. We're currently in the process of providing beta access to users that are interested with a login password to this dashboard. We are also backfilling data. It's a fairly intense process, running through every single transaction, trying to figure out how much value was extracted. And we're in the process of backfilling this. We really wanted to make sure that we captured a baseline before Black Thursday. So that's why we're starting in February of 2020 to kind of see how things were going when things were normal. And then when liquidations picked up, I'd like to understand how those liquidations were profitable and how much they were weighing on the chain in some of their inefficiencies. So we're still expanding on coverage metrics and the accuracy of this classification system. And the way the system works is that we need to specifically target dApps that expose this MEV and create an adapter that allows us to look at those on-chain interactions and figure out what actually occurred. So we're adding more inspectors because there's a fairly long tail in DeFi, but we can probably cover a huge amount of it with maybe 15 or 20 inspectors. We'll probably cover the vast majority of use cases for figuring out how much MEV is out there and how much bots are paying in fees and how much gas is used on mainnet inefficiently due to these MEV instructions. Can we go to the next slide? This is a view of the dashboard right now, based on the number of blocks that we have grabbed so far. From here, you can see that we're quantifying on average how much MEV there is per block just by looking at total MEV dividing by the number of blocks we've looked at. We look at blocks wasted, which is not the things that extracted MEV, but the things that attempted to extract MEV and failed. Things that, for instance, might have been a transaction that checked the status of a liquidation before proceeding. We classify that as wasted space because the inefficiencies of the priority gas auction led to many transactions that landed on chain that weren't really useful. We also look at how much the the bots are paying to miners relative to how much the actual opportunity is yielding, and we break that down. We can see that right now the traders are making a pretty hefty profit on their activities. We're planning on both increasing these the coverage of the apps that we code up here. So these are kind of baseline metrics. These are of the things that we've coded up so far, of the inspectors that we've written for various DeFi protocols. These are the metrics we found, and as we add more coverage for these DeFi apps, we will see these numbers rise. This is just the things that we could positively attribute to these metrics. One thing that we found, you can see that in that top left chart, which is kind of interesting, is that the MEV extracted per block is extremely volatile, and you can see that one 400, that's in ETH, right? That one 400 ETH transaction is actually not a false positive. It actually was a 400 ETH MEV that was extracted on that block, and it's going to be important to when we talk to miners about how much MEV there is to recognize you need to look at it on a long time horizon for how much MEV and average that out, as opposed to just looking at the day-to-day the block-to-block normal ones, because every so often, especially with liquidations, we see very large MEV opportunities. That's one of the discoveries we've had from running the system. Next slide. This is just showing that we are we've processed a bunch of older blocks, we've processed a bunch of newer blocks. We're currently in the process of filling in blocks in the middle. So this shows us a bit of metadata here about how many blocks we have processed in these various ranges of 10,000. No, I think it's actually 20,000 blocks. Just to show that we're making progress in filling these in, but it just takes processing time, and it's a process that is going through. And whenever we make changes to our system, it's a reevaluation that's going to have to happen again. So we're probably going to be making kind of sweeps across this block range as we make improvements to the MEV inspect system that generates these metrics. Next slide. Oh yeah, and this was the this is just a zoom in of that MEV per block, just because I found it to be a pretty interesting chart with this very profitable MEV extraction opportunity, which was just it was a simple arbitrage, and they ended up paying like 0.0. They didn't even pay very much gas. It was like a 21 Gwei transaction that yielded this massive response. So there's a bit of I would say outsized distribution of fee splits between bot operators and miners. Next slide. I think that's the last of these ones. Yep.
All right. We now move on to the second part of our agenda, our main event, our roast, with our roast master today, Dan. So Dan, would you mind?
Sorry, can I ask some questions before the prior part?
Sure. We have a few minutes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So this is actually wonderful. This dashboard. I mean, it's really important to understand what's the current state of the art, right? I mean, what is happening actually to visualize this in some way. It's great. So my question would be, in what language do you write these contributors or these inspectors, or how can we contribute an inspector?
So yeah, that's an interesting question. So we initially wrote a version in TypeScript, but then Georgios offered to provide a large amount of engineering help, and he ended up writing it in Rust. And okay. So right now the inspector and the main engine of the system is written in Rust.
So is it based on parity then?
Yes. So
okay, cool.
we use parity because they have some really nice block-based, very detailed internal transaction tracers. Yeah, we just have a parity we have a parity archive node, and then walk through and grab all that data.
Yeah, we had kind of a pain working with parity. That's why we're working currently with Geth. But okay, because it would make it easier, right, to contribute inspectors. And the other question is, what metrics do you use to classify an MEV? I mean, you might have false positives or false negatives, right, depending on your metric that tells you that's an MEV or that's not an MEV.
Absolutely. These are numbers that I think are going to be hopefully close to reality based on the ways that we classify. But you're right, classification is an extremely difficult process, and we generally do it by, we look at the internal calls and try to use our inspectors to break those into various classifications, and then for trades we look for cyclical trades that recognize, create an arbitrage opportunity. We classify the net benefit of assets and normalize into ETH. But yeah, it's because these contracts can all operate in such different ways, it can be really difficult to recognize what's profit and what is funds
transfer.
coming. Yeah, what's transfer, especially if funds coming from a system that you don't understand. One of the examples that I use most often is, if we didn't classify Ether Delta, then somebody that's just withdrawing their funds from Ether Delta be like, oh my God, you called this one function and they sent you 500 ETH, you made 500 ETH, but we didn't actually understand that storage slot value that changed reduced their assets by 500 ETH at the same time. And so, yeah, it's difficult, and we generally try to be very conservative about it. And so these, when we really can't classify things well, we opt not to, especially when it comes to the classifying the profit. But these charts really exist, I think, to kind of help us understand the scale of.
No, that's lovely, right? It's really what we need. So just to give you a bit of a background, we're currently trying to model from which transaction value or value in general a transaction would incentivize a miner to fork the chain to exploit the MEV. So we just use some Markov decision process to model this thing, and I mean, it might be a model, it might be wrong, right? But we try to kind of understand from what, how much bigger than the block reward does an MEV opportunity need to be for miners to start forking the chain, because this is kind of the step at which it deteriorates the security of the chain, right? So that's something we're currently looking at. So wonderful, great dashboard.
Great, thanks.
We have time for one more question. Scott, there's a question in the chat. If you can see it, if not, I can read it out live from Robert.
Looking, was it earlier? Where is it at? Oh, there it is. Taking out these outliers, curious what the average variance of the lower 99%. I see. So looking at that top left chart here, the question is, if you kind of remove these outliers, what is how much can miners consistently expect to have per block? That is a good question. That would not be that hard to write in SQL, I don't think. Let me get back to you. I don't think it changes this number that much, because this is a very, very large block range here. This is a block range of like over 1 million blocks. And so that 400 gets, this 400 here and these ones here, they get diluted pretty quickly. I mean, probably down well below the 0.01 or 0.005. So I don't think it's going to massively change this number. I think this number is, for the most part, made up pretty consistently within standard blocks. But yeah, that's I'll do that. Let me add a chart for that. I think that's a very interesting metric to say how much miners can generally expect to make over time without the lottery of liquidation.
All right. Let's now move on to the second part of the agenda, our roast. Steffi, if you could go to the roast slide. Dan is our roast master today. Thank you very much, Dan, for agreeing to be our roast master for this first roast. Could you briefly present yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. So yeah, I'm really grateful to everyone on the Flashbots team for inviting me to do this. I'm an investor at Paradigm, who's supporting Flashbots in this research, and generally I'm a researcher interested in a lot of topics, including MEV and its impact on Ethereum. I was really glad to be asked to do this for the roast because I think that everyone on the Flashbots team has really been given a free pass so far and hasn't been subject to the kind of scrutiny, especially Tina, that maybe is warranted for people with such power. So I wanted to ask you just a few questions of this team to really hold them accountable for what they're proposing to do. So the first question is one that I think is maybe the most common one that comes up when anyone talks about a project to capture MEV and help out with MEV, which is how can you distinguish tools that can be used for good MEV, positive MEV, or ones that can use MEV for positive purposes from ones that are just purely extractive? And so I'll direct that one first to the people on the team. So if you want to.
Sure, I can give it a stab. And then I would love to open the floor for public challenges or other team members or public clarification questions. I think that's a really good question. I think, I wish I knew the answer to it. I think that's one of our research questions, and it's something on our research agenda, and there's quite a few researchers on the call. So, I think coming up with a framework for the various types of MEV and the benefits and harms to various stakeholders and mapping that out kind of completely is something that needs to happen. I think there's some obvious intuition we have from traditional finance, where traditional finance tries to toe this line kind of a lot, where they want to be extracting something to an extent from the engines of capitalism, right? That's why exchanges do things like charge for colocation and charge for order types, and why routing is such a market. But many times they kind of end up being seen as or acting predatory because of either information asymmetry or because they've set things up in a way that advantage certain actors over others. So I think to kind of port the analogy there, good MEV would be something like providing liquidity, which is one of the goals that any HFT company will tell you their enterprise has, of making markets more efficient. So someone really needs this token, this one block on Uniswap, and there's been a change since the last block in the market rate. The price has gone down on an off-chain market. Why should this person have to pay a higher price? So that arbitrage opportunity against the pool in some ways both helps users and maybe makes our bot some money in the process. Bad MEV, I mean, we've seen a million types. I would argue that many of the smart contract hacks we've seen are bad MEV, like the BZX attack. Probably a strategy where, let's say Uniswap had no slippage limits in theory, and you just reorged every single user to get the worst possible execution. Or even with their limit order, you give them the worst possible price. Even if normally they'd send this transaction and they'd get a mid price, you just make sure they get the worst possible price for every single order. So that seems more unambiguously bad MEV. I think there's also MEV in terms of bribing other protocols that are used to perform attacks and things like that socially seem bad. So that's I guess my intuition. But I think to answer the question, if you're interested on this, that would be a great FRP, and maybe to collaborate with other people in Flashbots.
So would you say the answer is that you know it when you see it? Good MEV versus bad?
I don't know if we know when we see it. I think we want to have I think we want to have a better answer than that, because it's going to probably be politically contentious if MEV starts being extracted. And I imagine there will be kind of a natural opinion that will form in the community of people just assessing for themselves. But also I think having a more rigorous system of understanding would be cool too.
Now this maybe gets into my third. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, doesn't this question go back to do we need KYC on chain? Because
do we need KYC on chain?
Yeah, because if you have anonymity or like pseudonymity, then how do you? I mean, you can always disguise, let's say, a bad MEV as a good MEV, depending on how you describe a good MEV, right? So without identity, I don't see conceptually how you can avoid that, actually.
I'm not sure identity helps with.
I think that would be a cool.
I'm not sure identity. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that would be a cool, result. I don't know if I agree that all bad MEV can be disguised as good MEV. I think there are things that will unambiguously like show up. Like for example, one example of bad MEV could be breaking MakerDAO governance to liquidate people's CDPs and like breaking the DAI peg. Like there's no way to kind of disguise that as something good because people will notice that the DAI peg is screwed up. So I think there are some kinds of MEV maybe that are unambiguously like detectable, but I agree for many classes of MEV that is probably true. And like, I think it would be interesting to look at which ones can be disguised and how. Yeah, I think identity is very controversial, so I'm not gonna touch that part of it. Maybe Dan was kind of starting to do that.
Yeah, I mean that would potentially be throwing out the baby with the bathwater there to give up on privacy in the interest of stopping MEV. Like then at that point, why not just go back to why not just have everything be done on centralized protocols? But I also agree with Phil that I think there's qualitative distinctions. It sort of gets into the third question that I had, which is even if you can distinguish between good and bad MEV, the tools that you build will likely be usable for both. And so if you were building these and keeping them in secret and using them to extract only good MEV and fight the bad MEV, then potentially there could be, that could have a positive effect. But if you're open sourcing these, then anyone can use them. So the analogy that I'm drawing here is between, you can think about like nuclear technology or artificial intelligence or biological weapons, or maybe 3D printing, where making something open source and these norms of as much openness as possible in these kind of areas where there's potential conflict between individuals who have this and where the technology being spread out can be bad. Just being open source may not be enough or may actually be harmful. Like, do you think that nuclear war would be prevented if it was possible for anybody to build nuclear bombs? If it was something that was open source?
It's like basically like the question of whether script kiddies will use open source viruses or Trojans, right? And I mean, yeah, there might be some negative impact, but it might also boost the research community to become stronger. It's a cat and a mouse game, no? In the end.
Yeah. So I have a lot to say about that question, but I think other people on the team should get a chance before I say anything. So I don't know, or random people, if anyone has anything to say, go ahead.
Yeah, how about it?
But
I mean, I don't think that the system that we're building, while worthwhile, is not nuclear nuclear physics, and we've already seen several other projects attempt to launch things in the same vein as this kind of back channel miner interaction system. And given the way that the hash rate works in Ethereum, and given the way that mining power is going to be drawn to the most profitable, I think that there is going to have to be some, once somebody starts doing this, which we believe people are going to, I think it's going to become a necessity to be competitive and not something that you can weigh in on philosophically. It'd be like if, go on.
Go ahead.
I mean, it'd be like, I don't think what we're doing is complicated enough that we can think, oh, if we don't do this, then nobody's going to be able to pull this off. I think that what we can do is put ourselves in the middle and raise awareness of it and visibility, and try to ensure that it is as open as possible. Because once one pool starts doing it, I think that it's going to become difficult for others to be competitive.
So doesn't that logic, what you're describing there, which I think is certainly true, where there's this kind of Moloch incentive problem where it's in everybody's interest, or it becomes necessary to survive to extract all kinds of MEV possible. Doesn't this prevent you from exercising any kind of ethical judgment over what MEV you extract? Because ultimately you'll be outcompeted by anyone who's willing to go more malicious.
One of the things we talked about with Sparkpool is that they talked a lot about the, since not all their hashing power is their own, but it's contributed by a lot. Like there is still some community sentiment behind it, and it sounds like the people who contribute hash power are fairly involved, just given how interested in that Sparkpool was. So I wonder if we can still have some sort of community assessment here with, understanding the types of MEVs, so long as it's detectable, being included. But yeah.
If I can weigh in here, I think
Please.
Arthur made an interesting analogy between, sort of open sourcing infosec, viruses and sort of tools of cybersecurity destruction with what's going on with MEV. It feels like the big asymmetry here is that MEV is free to be analyzed by anybody and free to be weighed in on by anybody, but miners and a relatively small number of mining pools have the ultimate ability to actually deploy these weapons. And it doesn't seem like they're particularly responsive, or at least intrinsically responsive to the, complaining intelligentsia on Twitter. And so I think one thing that's very dissimilar between the example of like doing cybersecurity research out in the open and the example Dan gave of, open nuclear weapons, it seems analogous, where it's very difficult for individuals or small organizations to create and use nuclear weapons, but governments are very able to, and they're much less, many of them, or at least the worst among them, are not responsive to the complaints of their citizens. And it feels like we're in a similar situation where we're appealing to, Sparkpool is the biggest mining pool, I believe. And so it maybe seems plausible that they're fairly altruistic and they're fair-minded, and that there's an appeal to like, okay, hopefully these people will have the best interests of the community at mind, and they'll weigh the extractive elements of being a mining pool with the kind of stewardship that they also must have. But mining pools are competitive, and mining pools have gone up and down in their ownership of hash rate. And if they're the most altruistic, then would we not expect them to get outcompeted?
Hi, folks.
Rick, did you have something to say?
Yeah,
Hello.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's really fascinating how long it's taken for this conversation to arise in the public. People at the EF, I mean, this is what prompted Casper. I mean, when Casper was first being created, the discussion was, well, what happens when miners turn malicious and start reordering transactions and doing these sorts of things? I mean, this has been a long-standing issue. And so for me, when I was asked to think about that stuff all those years ago, the conclusion that I sort of came to was, well, let's start. I'm going to do it a little bit backwards because I actually have to go soon. But, when, Bitcoin is a single application blockchain, right? It just handles Bitcoin transactions. On Ethereum, we have these competing applications. And so there's just this natural competition for block space that we have in Ethereum that doesn't exist in other chains. And we're just kind of stuck with that. As long as we have a first price auction system, and I recommend that everyone look at Tim Roughgarden's work. He's actually paying attention to blockchain stuff, which is great. And he invented a lot of this stuff. I mean, he really knows the subject matter super well. So a lot of what I'm saying is going to come from my interactions with him. As long as we're having these first price auctions, we should expect the miners to do things that are against the user's best interest. I just don't see that's part of the design. So if we want to change the behavior, which I think as a community is a reasonable thing to want, we really do have to look at how we auction off block space and just do it differently. I don't think that makes any. I don't think having a conversation about good or bad MEV makes any sense. To me, there's only good and bad protocols, and if your protocol is susceptible to exploitation from miners in this way, and you as a designer didn't want that to happen, then you just failed as a designer. And there's not much anyone else, no amount of wringing our hands on Twitter or anything is going to fix that, because Ethereum, assumes that miners are going to, there's some weird assumptions in Ethereum about what miners are going to or not going to do. And I think this is just, our chickens are coming home to roost, basically.
This is a really fascinating discussion. I don't want to cut it off, but I do want to manage to cover some of the other questions, including about proof of stake.
I would agree with that.
Go ahead, Phil. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that raises, so I have a few just brief things to say to that. One thing is, I think I kind of disagree.
Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, there's like a huge Hangouts lag on my end. I don't know why. So if I'm like a minute delayed, let me just rant and then it'll be over. So yeah, a few things. I guess one of them is that I think the conversation between good and bad MEV is still worth having in that framework, because then it becomes like a protocol design question of like, how much should we constrain miner behavior? Because presumably there's going to be other trade-offs associated with like whatever constraints we have on preventing maximal MEV extraction. But I think I do agree with the general sentiment, and like one sentiment that I wanted to contribute to this issue, maybe as food for thought before we move on, is just that like we are building systems that are intended to work in an adversarial environment, which I think is unique for financial systems. Like you don't assume that NASDAQ will be adversarial in their ordering, at least not as openly, not maximally. But in cryptocurrency, that's kind of like a design goal, that like we want these things to be secure, even if all of these people are doing bad things. So I think if we don't have a framework for minimizing and kind of extracting MEV to the max extent all the time, whatever's left on the table kind of becomes a subsidy for whoever is willing to ethically not care about the system, which I think from like a security equilibrium point of view is not good for a permissionless system. Which I think in many ways is different than, the atomic bomb that kills everyone. I also think that like there is more of an argument to be made that you opt into Ethereum than that you opt into, having a bomb dropped on you. But I also think that argument is tenuous, because like as things kind of get more important, like it might not really be a choice for many people. So that's all I had to say.
Cool, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I wanted to move on to some of the other questions. So one that's very topical, because the Ethereum 2 deposit contract just reached its threshold for activation of the beacon chain, which I think is scheduled for December 1st, whatever that means. I'm curious for what the Flashbots team or anyone else on the call who's familiar with ETH2 design thinks about how ETH2 will affect MEV and how your tools might adapt for that. Or proof of stake generally.
My understanding is that there won't be much of a difference. It's just a transaction ordering problem, and that doesn't go away with ETH2. You just have validation signers instead of proof of work. So I don't see anything fundamentally different about ETH2.
Do you think there could be? Like, would it be possible to slash people for extracting MEV?
That's an interesting question.
Is it open to protocol design space anymore?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Then I mean, anything you could do there, you would have parallels that you could do in proof of work chains. But yeah, so I don't see any fundamental difference between proof of work and proof of stake with respect to MEV.
Well, it's not
Yeah, proof of
parallel
work.
proof of work, right? Yeah,
Right.
because in proof of work, yeah, the miners just run off. There's no single pool of capital to slash.
You could have miners. You could have miners put in capital when they mine a block, and like it's slashable or something to penalize them for abuse. But
yeah, it'd be pretty harebrained to try to slash people in
janky.
proof of work. Yeah, exactly. I think in proof of stake, I think actually it might well be that the idea, like the actual coordination required to slash malicious miners, is so remote and so unlikely. But they sort of know that it's the nuclear option, right? It's sort of the way that like constitutional challenges almost never actually get litigated. But everybody knows in the back of their mind, like, look, there is some path down which we could end up litigating this, very negative thing that could happen in U.S. government. I can imagine something like that operating in ETH 2.0.
You mean like at a social layer?
Exactly, but sort of being a remote but real enough possibility that it will just keep miners in check much more so than they would in ETH 1.0.
Yeah, I think it's feasible. Although I don't necessarily know it's a good thing, because then you start to compromise the neutrality, the neutrality of the protocol. So I would be a little bit worried about people threatening to do that. But yeah, that's social layer stuff, which I'm less familiar with than more hard protocol design things.
One point there from my limited understanding of ETH2, and Robert just mentioned it as well, is a block producer in ETH2 is chosen a little bit more in advance, so they have more time to actually prepare for MEV extraction. And so that means there's potential, if they have more time to prepare, they have more compute power, or like more compute time to run some simulations to be able to extract MEV in a maximal fashion. One point to also make is relative to proof of work miners on Ethereum, the validators are maybe more aligned because they're staking their ETH. So there's a more direct alignment, and in some way there's maybe something to think about there, although I don't have like a good intuition of like the implications of that. Definitely, as Austin pointed out, there's still transaction ordering. And so in that case, the problem of MEV is still very much present.
So I would actually add one other point, Dan, on that to Alex, because I agree with you. There's a little more subtlety, though, to the block proposers knowing a little bit in advance that they're going to propose a block. It's also that they know 100% that the work they're doing at that time is valuable, and they know not to bother to order MEV transactions at other times. So the MEV attacks from an algorithm perspective can become much more complex and still be profitable. If you're doing this all the time with proof of work and you do very complex transactions, you could end up burning more, AWS time or your equivalent time in your, hardware pool. So so I think that it'll be harder. And so from a protocol standpoint, right, the protocol designer makes a set of rules that define good and bad behavior and incentivizes it. The algorithm designer, which is the MEV attacker, is looking for an algorithm that follows the rules, right? And so, things that we could think are bad still follow rules, but so they can be more sophisticated in the algorithms they put together. So it's going to make the protocol job harder, I think, in ETH2.
Go ahead. Oh
yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think we have, so the core thing is we don't have any proof of stake algorithms really at this point that have enough interesting economic interactions to extract meaningful MEV. So we are still very early in this game. And so we don't really know how it would work. My experience with validator behavior is that validators are going to be probably optimizing for investing engineering resources in sort of extracting MEV during their proposer slots, but less in, it seems extremely unlikely that people are going to be censoring block producers to try and extract more MEV. So it may be less pathological on the protocol level to have MEV extraction in proof of stake networks.
I wonder though if that doesn't mean that we should create more pathological protocol extraction, because otherwise it's a security hole that someone could still exploit, just that the current set of validators happens to be incentivized for whatever other reason not to. But I think that's a complicated political question also.
Yeah, so this is the accelerationist philosophy of just let's make MEV let's make the environment as hostile as possible, as fast as possible, so that we evolve into solutions that can survive it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm advocating for that, to be clear, but I think that there is an argument to be made that because of the way cryptocurrency is secured and the design goals of like at least the top few cryptocurrencies that are intended to operate in hostile political environments, I wonder if that's not something that's useful.
I find the lack of exploitation of like protocol level vulnerabilities to be very frustrating as like a protocol designer. It does feel like all of your effort in like trying to design systems that are resilient to this is like wasted because everybody just behaves altruistically in practice.
That was the big argument between Vlad and Silvio Micali at like FC 2017, where they like derailed the whole conference for 10 minutes and yelled at each other about whether people are honest or not. So maybe Silvio was right.
Well, I think there's also a difference between things like resilience against nation-state actors. I think proof of work and selfish mining are good examples of this, where there's sort of tail risks that you want to ameliorate against, whereas MEV extraction is more of a sort of continuous risk profile. It's not really that it's not really that hardening ourselves to MEV prevents some like super scary MEV miner showing up one day and really fucking things over. And so I think the accelerationist argument plays somewhat differently to something like the security of proof of work versus the security of the expectations around fairness of block ordering.
This is a bit of a tangent from ETH2 as a discussion, but I think one plan for how ETH2 will transaction execution, transaction ordering will actually work, and one that was proposed by Vitalik a couple months ago, was a roll-up centric vision of this, where transaction ordering is actually done at the roll-up layer. And so I've seen some interesting proposals for example, having the transaction ordering be done by just submitting to different shard blocks, and then they get aggregated later. So there's only so that lowers latency to confirmation, and also makes it harder potentially for someone proposing a block to be able to know exactly what the state of the rollup is when they do so. So it's sort of hard to do that. And then you can imagine more advanced ones involving like VDFs or some kind of blinding on top of the rollup, so that even the rollup proposer doesn't have the ability to see. So does transaction ordering blinding sort of fix MEV? Does that restore the fog of war?
Yeah, so one thing I will say is that, like, from my impression of Vitalik's trade-off preferences right now, it seems like this roll-up, MEV on the roll-up kind of way is what is the current preferred strategy for ETH2 to answer the original question. So it probably will be relevant to MEV, assuming that ETH2 plans go as laid out, which is rarely true. But anyway, let's assume it. And then I think there'll still be an interesting question of MEV, both within particular roll-ups. I think that's just like a fractal of the current MEV question on layer one, but also like across rollups. Like if each rollup is its own siloed universe that's running some set of dApps, there's still going to be a Flash Boys style kind of set of incentives, like classic 90s Flash Boys, to like move information from one shard to another, or synchronize things across shards. And that there will probably still be some economic benefit associated with being that actor. So quantifying that, I think, is an interesting research question, maybe even for the next phase after the MVP, when ETH2 is more concrete.
In a roll-up centric vision, though, like the like you can do you have a lot of flexibility on the protocol level to sort of modify, to like punish potential proposers for misbehavior, have them like provide additional guarantees, etc. Like, it's a lot like sort of the Cosmos vision of like application-specific consensus can be applied in that domain. And sort of, I'm very interested in that, like roll-ups.
Yeah, I think that raises an economic question, and this is the last thing I'm going to say for like the next 10 minutes. But like in the classical finance, right, there's all these fair markets, like the Buddhist work, for example, and like many other designs. But a lot of them are kind of analyzed by themselves. And when they are side by side with other slightly tweaked fair markets or the kind of limit order books that we have now, they have very different properties than when they're just kind of executing by themselves. So I wonder if that's like a general economic question of like, what is a good consensus algorithm, and how do these ones that have like all these fairness properties in isolation actually interact to provide fairness like to the whole ecosystem?
Well, so one question that's relevant to Paradigm as an investor in Flashbots is, how do you plan to make money for yourselves and for us? If you're giving away all these tools and not using them to extract all the massive amounts of bad MEV. Maybe that's a question for Tina. Sure.
Tina, do you want to? I can take it if you don't want to take it, Tina.
Sure, Alex, you go ahead. I think you still muted the wrong me.
Well, I think generally we think, you know, what we're building creates a lot of value, and so there'll be plenty of opportunities to make money on top of it. In the case of Paradigm in particular, right, I think what we are building benefits Ethereum broadly. And, you know, it's no secret that Paradigm is a large holder of Ethereum, and is also very invested in some of the projects that have been built on Ethereum, including, for example, Uniswap. And so, you know, helping these projects and the broad Ethereum community becoming more resilient and resistant to what can be seen as some existential risk, and, you know, at the very least, there are a lot of negative externalities involved, I think, you know, rises the general tide for any, you know, people that are exposed to Ethereum. That's kind of the you know, on that front. I think it's unclear yet how exactly we're going to, you know, these opportunities on top to make money, how we're going to approach them. What's clear for now is we definitely want to build, you know, this strong research organization, and we're very research oriented. And then as things go along and as things become clear, they will, I mean, we can definitely imagine already a few businesses that can be built on top. What I meant by what I said before is that whether Flashbots takes part in this or Flashbots stays as purely a research organization is up for discussion, and is not something on top of our mind at the moment. I hope that answers the question.
Well, I think just a challenge back, Dan, I thought we decided to shake hands because we're going to explore this together, aren't we? I think none of us on Flashbots or the greater MEV ship community like to make promises that cannot be delivered. The entire premise of Flashbots as a project relies on it needs to take an iterative approach of actually evaluating the economic and technical feasibility while in prod, and to see how much to verify whether validate whether there is going to be market validity in being able to bootstrap this market upfront. And that is the whole premise of MVP phase. And there are specific research targets, benchmarks that we've set up in evaluating the success in a non-revisionist way, in a sense of we want to look at the technical and economic metrics. However, if that is validated, we're in the process of doing so, the question becomes, where can the value accrue? Whether it goes to the ecosystem of being a player in the ecosystem, or whether the infrastructure itself can be able to create a positive feedback loop that can achieve network effect. And that question, it is being designed. However, one thing that we have made upfront in our commitment, which is also made clear in the ETH research post and reinforced in the Medium post, is the values that we stand by, that everything the core infrastructure Flashbots create will be open source and made available to the general public 100%. And whether Flashbots will, how it would plan to, in fact, bootstrap the two-sided market from a business perspective, would eventually, we will only design mechanism, and we in fact have some really fun mechanism. Well, look forward to a meme in the future down the road called Flashbots Olympic, where the searcher activities will be bootstrapped in plural. So I think that's the directions we are exploring, and it's a long-winded way of saying we do not have firm answer, and we do not want to be held liable for things that we do not know for sure, but are actively exploring.
I think that's a very, very fair answer. And to be clear, I think Paradigm is very proud to be supporting Flashbots regardless of what happens. I mean, the line we always heard back when we invested in Uniswap was that, oh, there doesn't seem to be a way for this to make money. So we're comfortable underwriting seed investments in things that seem out there to most people at the time. And we're very excited about our involvement in Flashbots. I had one more question, and then I can hand it off to the end, which was, Tina seems to have crossed it out because she's afraid of people knowing more about her. I met Tina about a year ago at DevCon, and when she organized a conference, took over and organized the entire conference, one-day conference in about 3 weeks, and was very impressed with that. But no one really knows where Tina came from or what her story is. And given how much power she's about to have over the MEV ecosystem, I wanted to ask her to maybe explain herself. Tina, can't hear you.
Oh, that, first of all, I believe that is a revenge against my mimifying of Dan's, glorious Twitter profile pic on the Michael Lewis book cover. But to answer that question, in all seriousness, Tina is a powerful meme. I'm not kidding. It's short for "there is no alternative," coined by the classical liberal philosopher Herbert Spencer, and then became a rhetoric forcefully institutionalized into pop culture. It's a doctrine by Margaret Thatcher in the 80s with a policy. But at this moment, it is currently an alias that represents one of my devices that's on this call to troll the last refuge of the established orthodoxies called traditional finance. But so I think what matters is not about who I am. I am a lifetime experimental economics student who is fundamentally interested in designing in prod the minimalist mechanism that could make surplus human capital fungible. So, AKA, I would like to be able to create an anti-fragile organization, like I said from the beginning, that can allow the kind of digital nomadic lifestyle that we all love in this age, and especially in crypto, especially in Ethereum, that everyone who wants to contribute, regardless of what your level is, you could find on Flashbots a role, be it whether you contribute by learning about DeFi, by writing the basic ground level inspectors, where you contribute to crowdsourcing knowledge, contribute to essentially increasing our MEV coverage through the MEV Explorer that we plan to roll out, or whether you are someone who is a academic researcher who is fundamentally interested in these fairness questions and these solving, but then applying it in things that actually matters to us, or you want to play the politician and see where it goes in distributing, if there is anything to be distributed, MEV, or governing how it should be distributed. I think everyone has a play and has a role in this ecosystem, and that's all that matters. And Tina is just a reflection of everyone's effort, and so who I am doesn't really matter.
Thank you, Tina. That was everything I was hoping for. To wrap us up, Phil, did you have any thoughts on that?
I was just gonna give some other spicy thoughts on the previous question, which is how we're gonna make money, which some people on this call are probably gonna
Sure.
slap me for later. But it also maybe relates to who Tina is, which I will just say Tina is a very powerful meme. And one of the first time I met Tina, she was talking about Flashbots over Flash Boys, and I just thought that was a great meme because you know, it's universally just better than Flash Boys. I think it's much more like 2020 than like 1990. So, you know, clearly a better meme maker than I am for my paper writing. So all props. But I will also say, like, on the how we're going to make money point, because I think this is relevant to you guys in the call and how things will go forward. I think that MEV is obviously a really important issue, and I'm glad you guys are all as passionate about it as we are. I think MEV has the potential to either be a great thing for crypto to organize and align incentives, or predatory to users and like harmful to our overall feel-good missions of being happy and like helping people in an adversarial environment. So I think we do need some sort of effort that's basically, you know, the word Carl likes to use, and I probably shouldn't call him out for this, but in regards to this is government, right? And we need some sort of body that corrects the externalities that come from just the raw capitalist extraction of MEV. And so what we plan to do is basically form a cartel that represents this body through like the sheer force of the people in it, which include all of you guys on this call. So there's like a lot of very prominent, very smart, very influential, you know, cryptocurrency people here who are interested in MEV and are on the kind of front lines of influencing this meme. And what we need to make sure is that MEV is extracted through a cartel that is socially aware and that is committed to doing the right thing, you know, in this extraction process. And really, I think one mechanism to do that is through taxation. So this infrastructure, you know, part of the goal is to redistribute some of what is going to be extracted anyway and what is already being extracted today to understand MEV and correct some of these externalities we've identified, such as this lack of transparency or inefficiencies at layer one, things like that. So there are a lot of ways which MEV can go south, and I think we need an independent, open, community-based, you know, organization to make sure that we use our collective force to make sure that these technologies are the best things they can be rather than like the average or worst things. In terms of how we plan to make money, you know, taxing that infrastructure and using it to do things like fund research fellowships and do research, that's one possibility. Competing on our own market is another one. You know, and maybe there will be future efforts, future subsidiaries, but either way, we don't know. And like, I would love to have you all involved. We're firm believers around aligning incentives. So like, if at any point that kind of incentive question is discussed, you know, we put the community first in all these aspects. And yeah, we just love to have you contribute based on this proof of work that Tina is all about, and that I'm sure she'll explain to you to this kind of cartel / effort.
Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks everyone from the Flashbots team for having me on and letting me roast you. I think that's our time for the MEV roast, so I'm gonna hand it back to Alex for the last part of the program.
All right. Thank you, Dan. That was really great. Love the conversation. Thank you, guys, non-Flashbot team, for participating in this. The last point on the agenda, and we have about, you know, another like 10, 11 minutes for it, is a general, oh, right, next MEV roast is December 9th, so mark your calendar for it. There is a public calendar that you can subscribe to. It is on the slides here, and I can send it as well if you give me a sec. The last bit, you know, for the last 10 minutes, basically, if you guys have any just general questions, anything you want to ask the Flashbots team that doesn't necessarily have to be related to the questions that Dan put out for the roast, this is your time.
Actually, for those remaining on the call, I would love to get a intro from people who's interested in, you know, e-meeting through the Google Hangout, because I think we had a lot of discussion on Discord. Like, maybe share a bit about like why, what specifically interests you, like which aspect of Flashbots and how you want to chime in. Whoever wants to share.
Okay, if nobody goes, I'm gonna start. Hi, my name is Arthur. I do blockchain research, academic blockchain research, mostly since 2012 full time. So I started with Bitcoin and moved into the Ethereum space as soon as it became more mature and quite interesting with the different opportunities such as MEV now. And what motivates me is really to understand things deeply, and to not just scratch the surface, but to really take a few questions and try to really go deep and get quantitative results. For example, what transaction value actually constitutes MEV, right? From which value onwards can we count MEV as an MEV value? So just as these very simple questions that are hard to quantify, that's something I really like. And later on, given this deeper knowledge, we can build better systems.
Yeah, happy to have you here, Arthur. Big fan of your work, obviously. And I think there's a lot of intersection. There's a lot of deep questions, both on the CS and game theory side of MEV. So yeah, excited to explore those.
I think Zaki has been raising his hand for the past like 30 minutes. I'm not sure whether his cursor is tired or not yet.
Oh, I said my thing.
Yeah, you guys ignored him, so he had to interrupt. We should be more organized about hand raising interruptions and like in the future, just so that people don't have to be aggressive. But thank you, Zaki, for exerting your will in that scenario.
I don't think anybody has ever accused me of not being aggressive. So.
Fair enough. Some people
so,
don't.
You know, in the recent conversation, I found out that Zaki has been thinking about the word, you know, MEV before, like 4 years before MEV, the term was coined. Zaki, you want to share a bit about the backstory?
I mean, I was just going to say that, like, from my point of view, probably the first time I really started, like, I mean, so when Andrew Miller did Honey Badger with his co-authors, which was like, I think probably the first blockchain consensus protocol that sort of treated MEV as a real thing. And at the time, like, even before that, like, you know, there were conversations about like order or fairness in this, like, in the weird niche community of public blockchain scalability in like 2014, 2015 timeframe. And we were thinking about like order, fairness, and like, you know, censorship incentives and all of these things. Like, all of this thinking has like goes back that far. And so, yeah, I mean, like a lot of the like reason why we wanted to build Cosmos was this idea of like, we thought that there would be a world where you would want application specific consensus. So you wouldn't have to, so you could do things like, you know, on this blockchain, like the proposers give out receipts to everybody who does a transaction and are slashable if they reorder transactions. And in other blockchains, we don't care because people do payments or governance or whatever on it, and it's less important. And so, yeah, I've been thinking about this for a really long time. It's really nice to see more people caring about it. Rick is probably in the same boat. We've probably been thinking about it for roughly the same amount of many years.
Yeah, I know there was also Hawk very early on. There were a few different protocol design papers that tried to achieve, you know, some degree of reordering resilience. I think the protocols that won were the ones that didn't do that, because it wasn't really something people concretely cared about until really DeFi started like actually exposing like really large amounts of you know, money in the real world. And like now suddenly there was a bot ecosystem. So I think it was like entirely a foreseeable problem. I'm curious in the future, like what will happen at the protocol design level, because I could see the argument for like doing this at the application level. I could see the argument for doing it at the protocol level. I could see like all sorts of interoperability concerns. And I think, you know, probably figuring this all out is solving the grand unified Cosmos vision of like app specific optimized engines. But that seems like a lot to solve and make that happen.
Hey guys, I just wanted to chime in. I'm Matt from Block Native. I know many of the folks who are here, but it's great to be here, and I think the initiative is really cool. For those of you who don't know us, we're sort of experts in the mempool, and we built a big honkin' mempool data system that actually has a perfect archival record going back a year. We have over 40 billion Ethereum mempool events that we think could be super valuable for research purposes, but we're not exactly sure how to engage. So in a couple of different ways, I've been kind of raising my hand saying, hey, we have a bunch of stuff that might be useful for this effort. If you guys are interested, let us know. We're a commercial entity and we're getting pulled into many very significant MEV conversations. These are not things on the surface, they're behind the scenes. These are potentially very lucrative. We have lots of debates internally about where we want to sit in this spectrum and what we want to participate in, but this is by no means abstract or theoretical for us. It is very upfront right now. I am involved in multiple conversations with multiple commercial entities who are looking to do real and serious things as it relates to MEV. And so we're trying to find our way in this ecosystem. And we very much want to, and historically have been supportive of research. We are small. We don't have a lot of capacity. So we sit on top of all sorts of data that we just don't have the capacity to review. So to the extent that it's relevant, we want to collaborate. To the extent that it's not relevant, we're happy to not. But we just wanted to say, hey, we're here, we're paying attention. We want to be supportive in whatever ways we can, but we're resource constrained. So I'm Matt, thank you.
Yeah, great to see you, Matt. I know we've talked in the past, and you know, I'm not always the most responsive to messages. I know you've offered before. I kind of wanted to figure out some structure to make sure that all this data that we're all collecting kind of ends up, you know, maximally benefiting the community and creating good things. So I think there's a lot of conversations that maybe we should have with Tina on what that looks like and like how you guys view the public commercial kind of line in your enterprise and like how we can kind of help translate the things we want public to the users.
Figure out a way to do so. And we internally, we want to be on the white hat side of all of this. But when you have economic incentive, which is gray hat, it's challenging because we have shareholders, right? I'm not super worried about it. I think we'll be able to navigate it just fine. But these matters are affecting our business right now. We have large trading customers who are abandoning certain strategies because they're no longer profitable because they're getting, you know, outcompeted by MEV, and then they basically downgrade their commercial accounts with us because the strategies they were using are no longer effective, right? So this is like this is here and now and affecting us. And so anyways, we want to be productive members of the community. And I'm curious to understand if what we have is really all that different from what anybody else has. Like if it's just another source of mempool data, that's fine. But if what we can offer is differentiated, we'd love to do so.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to explore. Would love to set up a chat after, and I think this is on the value front, on discovering where the community stands is in jointly illuminating the dark forest. We love the meme. We actually wrote the same one, and we kind of basically published at the same time. So I think we shared a similar vision of the future. So
We lost you, Tina, but I agree with everything you were saying before that.
Yes, but there's another one of me. But lastly, I want to really hear from Robert because you're a new face, Robert Roast. Sorry if I'm butchering your name.
Yeah, no, you definitely got my name close enough. Yeah, no, so I and Joseph Chow is also on the call. So some people on the call, like Dan Robinson knows us. We work at Consensus, and we've been helping Consensus build a stronger R&D effort with the aim towards supporting work that goes out in the common good, so open source projects, open protocols, and so forth. It's kind of the more foundation wing of the company. I feel like I'm less, I came on this call because I wanted to understand how deep the research well would be around MEV. And I think I have a better idea that it could be pretty deep, but I think the question is, it becomes relevant based on how big the opportunity is. And, you know, I think it's really good, Tina, that you sort of are trying to bring in people that are also on the economic side, because this is, in order to like make this, you know, kind of like deserving a lot of R&D effort requires there being a big enough opportunity to move people from the altruistic to the malicious side. Because if it's a small opportunity, people tend to behave altruistic. So I have a better feeling now that this is important. So thank you. I will definitely be there at the next meeting as well, and I'll be doing some reading so I can participate more then. Thanks for calling me out.
Yeah, super glad to have you. And I think we can convince hopefully you, but hopefully anybody, that the research well exists. And I think there's a lot of good unexplored questions that are going to be very practically important that will take many, many, many years to answer. So I'm pretty excited about all that too.
Yeah, I should also say that I have a predisposition to like trying to see if it can be solved at layer 1, because it's universal then, versus it's always nice to do things at the application layer or layer 2, but it doesn't as generally hit things. If it can do the bonus of actually allowing there to be a non-fragile mechanism for supporting R&D by having kind of a service that's taxing, that then puts money, whatever money it does make, back into kind of common goods work, I think that's awesome. So I'm hoping we could, I'm hoping the research shows that there's some good layer 1 type things that we could do for it. That would be really cool.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
Awesome. Anyone else? If not, I think we're a bit over time. And one of my devices has already died. That usually means it's time. So without further ado, perhaps we will see you in 2 weeks or sooner, because you can always find us on our core dev call, which happens every week, twice a week, in fact. And we will have our first public research workshop starting next Thursday, and it will be every Thursday from next Thursday onward. That said, anyways, have a great Thanksgiving, Turkey Days, and talk to you soon.
Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Great work.
Thanks, everyone.